Yeah, sorry for this technical problem, and let's get started. So, hello everyone, my name is Mahdi. I work for Vaadin as a developer advocate. And this is going to be a buff, right? So, anyone here not familiar with buff? Like, okay. So just to give you a heads up, buff is not supposed to be a presentation. It's not supposed to be like me showing you anything. It's supposed to be you talking to me, right? So maybe I can like start this by first get to know each other a little bit more, and also we can start this by giving you ideas. What can you ask me about, or what is the topic of today? Okay. So can I make an assumption that everyone here is a Java developer? Anyone here not a Java developer? No? Okay. So everyone here is a Java developer, and anyone here heard about Vaadin before, where I work? So who doesn't know what Vaadin is? 2, 3? Okay. So obviously, like, I come from Vaadin, and that's basically the background where I'm bringing here. And I hope you ask me Vaadin-related questions, but you can still ask me Java questions. So Vaadin is an open source framework for front-end development. And it has been in the market for over 18 years now. And the biggest thing about it, or the biggest change that happened to the framework, is that we moved to standard web components. And that was announced like 2 years ago. And then since this announcement, many people started to ask us, are you switching to web components, so you're giving away the Java? And that's mainly the topic of today, like still 100% Java, like the promise of 100% Java, right? Everything in Java for web development, front-end development. So that's Vaadin Framework, okay? And the topics that I have for you today is probably like I have 10 pointers on what Vaadin does for Java developers or for the Java community to help them write the front end 100% in Java. Okay? So I'm going to go over those 10 points to give you some ideas on what you can ask about, and then we can have a discussion. All right? Sounds good? I mean, it's excellent from you to leave the drinks downstairs and leave the party and sit here for 1 more hour, but I hope it's going to be equally rewarding. Right? So again, the whole deal about the framework. It's an open source framework in Java to help you write everything in Java, or any, let's say like any virtual machine language. You can use any virtual machine language to write the front end. So imagine a situation where you have a team that don't necessarily know JavaScript, or you don't want to write the JavaScript stuff or HTML and so on. You don't want to manage layouting and sizing and all these kind of things. So this is basically what we bring here in the framework. We have been successful for over 18 years now, and we're still moving forward with this same concept, but adding more capabilities. Actually, version 14 is going to be released next week, and that's like even more capabilities to be able to guarantee like 100% Java ecosystem for Java developers. Okay, so anyone hear about standard web components, or what is web components? Okay, so the idea behind web components is we are switching from the old model of creating components that are like only working for Vaadin, and switching to a model where you can create a component that anyone, Angular developers and Vue developers and anyone else, can use as well in their framework. And here I'm giving you an example, for example, how to bring any external web component and use it inside the framework. So let's assume a person, John Smith, developed a web component for Angular. You can just bring it inside the framework with Java code and start to use it right away. And we also give you capabilities on how to extend the components. So that's built-in capability. You can extend any component just like extending any Java class. Progressive web apps. You heard about progressive web apps? Anyone? Interesting. So progressive web apps is a new standard in the web development and in the browser development that allows you to make your application installable inside your desktop or inside your mobile application. So your client visits your website, for example, and then the browser shows a pop-up. Do you want to install this web application inside your device? And that applies on desktop and applies on mobile. So something like that requires boilerplate JavaScript code and service worker and manifest file and so on and so forth. So we save all of this with a small annotation. So the annotations that you see here at PWA make your Java application installable and make it a progressive web app. Eventually, you can also get more stuff like notifications and geolocation and hardware access, Bluetooth, camera, microphone, and all these kind of things. All the modern stuff, you can just do it by enabling the PWA capability. Routing, one of the important things also. So you do not need to manage URLs and parameters and arguments and all these kind of things. You do not need to manage them with JavaScript or anything. You just add the annotation at route and give it the path. It can be multiple paths, so it can be /login, /user, /ID, for example. It can be multiple things, and it can be incorporated inside outer layout, if you want. You can also have a server-side navigation if you want. So this is a front-end navigation that happens on the client side, on the browser level. But also, if you want to make sure that the back end also make navigation, that's still a capability. The whole concept of how things work here is just like any Swing-like application. So I suppose all of you developed a Swing application before. It's basically you declare a button, you declare a layout, you add the button inside the layout. That's exactly the same thing. And the framework is event-driven. So you make the round trip from client side to the server side through events.
Can I have a question?
Yeah.
You showed some events, and then this is, let's say, program. Okay, in that program, I can say in English. Okay? So I would expect to do it in easier way, like with annotation, like subscribe, and then the event instead of writing this whole code. Is it possible with Vadim?
Can you give me an example? So let me switch.
You have this code above, and this is like you have to write a few lines of code.
This?
The previous one. Exactly.
Okay.
You have to write this everything, but maybe there is an alternative with simple annotation, or there is not.
So if I understand you right, you want to have an annotation to connect to a front end.
Have some method, and then above I write an annotation that will subscribe some event, and then this method is executed.
Okay, I gotcha.
Just without writing this everything.
So what we have right now is a similar approach. If you want to subscribe to an event on the client side, a JavaScript event.
Yeah, I mean the client side, like you have with AI. This is a framework from Red Hat, and this is also frontend.
Okay.
And they have something like this.
Yeah. So let me try to. Is this code good enough? Yeah, so we have this called event handler. So event handler, you can basically use it on top of a method, like let's call it public call JavaScript, something like that. And then public, let's call it void, to avoid the errors. So something like that, and then it's gonna call a method called call JavaScript on the client side. But here, it requires, this is something that I wanted to show at the end. This requires you to go to the extra mile, which is I still need to add a JavaScript code. So I'm trying to tell you hey, you can do everything on Java. But yeah, there are corner cases where you practically still need to write JavaScript at the end of the day. And then you find a situation where you created a JavaScript function, and then you want to reach that function, then this is how to do it. Yeah. But
That is called JS. What is inside? Is there real JS or?
yeah, so you write this on the client side on a JavaScript file, for example.
Is it possible to use JS interop and call Java or call JavaScript via Java? I mean the JS interop from the GWT you don't use now, or maybe you still use it.
JS interop.
JS interop. Is it possible to use it? And then I'm still pure Java,
So we have those two approaches right now. So this is approach where you directly write a JavaScript code.
I don't like it.
You don't like it. Nobody does.
In some string, so yes, I would like to use Java instead of this.
Yeah. So the title of this this topic, that was number 10 actually. So the title here, just the background of this, is basically I was saying that we all know that JavaScript is the browser language. So if you write Java, if you write C#, if you write PHP, whatever language you love to write, even if you write assembly code, at the end of the day you need to go back to JavaScript because this is the basic assembly code of the browser. Even Angular developers need to convert their TypeScript into JavaScript. So what I'm trying to say here is, even though we provide you with a lot of capabilities, we try in Vaadin Framework to provide you with a lot of capabilities to stay on the Java side. In some corner cases where you forcefully still need to write JavaScript, so we provide you with somehow more or less capabilities to overcome that. So this is one ugly way of doing it, which is basically writing a string of JavaScript and say, like, execute this on the browser. And this is the less uglier, which is basically you provide a JavaScript file and then include it inside your Java class. So this JavaScript file is going to be linked with this Java class, and then you create something called Polymer template, and you can make these communications that I just mentioned, which is you can read JavaScript variables, you can send value for those JavaScript variables, and you can interact with JavaScript functions. And add event handler, what I just showed you now, is basically if this function is called in the JavaScript, then here you're going to get the response. Does it make sense? So yeah, I mean this is actually a very interesting topic to talk about. We know Angular and React are one of the most popular frameworks right now. For React developers, at least, they're writing JavaScript, which is not an issue. But if we're talking about Angular, they're using TypeScript. And now there is Google Flutter, right? So Google Flutter is using Dart. So anyone who is inventing any kind of code, any kind of language that is trying to cover every corner case, we still need to go back to JavaScript. And I cannot promise you that everything on Earth can be doable, but what you can do is basically still have a capabilities and tool to go to this level. Practically speaking, we hope that in all the corner cases that you might need, like specific components, specific use case, specific things to do, all those are actually already covered in the normal Java APIs. That's what we're trying to do, and people like you in the community are coming to us and bringing us ideas and comments on how to improve the framework. So yeah, please go ahead and send that on our GitHub to improve. Like, tell us, like, you don't like this way, for example, or something, and then we can improve it.
One more question to keep this clear about the JS interop and J2CL. Is it something that is no longer working with Vadim, or is it still possible to use it?
I actually do not remember exactly what JS interrupt was doing, but
the JS interop is mapping, like you have TypeScript mapping from JavaScript to TypeScript, and JS interop is mapping from JavaScript to Java. So this is the GWT from 2.8 above, so GWT 3.0, let's say, and this is the same what is being used by J2CL, Java to Closure from Google, let's say new GWT. And I heard from the description you no longer like GWT, but maybe
okay.
it's still possible to use it with Vadim or not?
No. The short answer is no. So exactly as you said, we no longer use GWT for front-end components. And the reason behind that, there are many, many reasons, but the biggest thing is we wanted to make it easier to move forward. So GWT as a project has been a very good project and great and still under development now, but the thing is it's moving very slow. And to get like GWT 3.0 has never been announced, right? Released. It's still not released, and nobody knows when it's going to be released, maybe in 5 years. So we don't want to wait 5 years till we see another version, and then the development is very slow. So that's why we do not want to like wait that much. And what's happening on the front end and the web development is that things are moving very fast, and using web component standard, it's a standard. It's not us who invented it, right? So using web component standard can allow you as a developer to pick any web component that's available on the web and just use it right away. So something new happened, like let's assume, I don't know, some things that can read your mind. A web component that can read your mind. You don't need to wait us to develop it. You just take the web component that does that and then put it inside the code and it will work right away.
Yeah, right, but this is not Java. If you want to prepare your custom web component, then you have to write a real web component using
Yeah, so if you have to write the web component, you definitely have to write it in JavaScript. If the web component is made available by someone, like someone has developed it, then you can use it inside the Vaadin Framework directly. So yeah, right. If you have to write the...
my custom one, then I have to write it.
If there is a possibility that you can extend an existing component, so let's take a less complex example. Let's say a bottle layout, a bottled layout, okay? So bottled layout is a form of a horizontal layout, but every column is a bottle shaped. So that can be probably done through Java without the need to write any JavaScript code. So that's one way of doing it. But if it's a completely revolutionary different thing and nobody has written it before, then yes, unfortunately, you will still have to write it in JavaScript. Yeah.
Do you have examples of such simple, when I'm able to extend some existing one? Do you have some examples?
So extending an existing...
Yeah, like this. You have only a comment about the implementation. Do you have some examples?
Yeah, I can search for some example, but before I search, I mean, like, I'm trying to imagine what would be here. I mean, it's nothing custom here. We don't hide anything here. This is a Java class called Composite that has div. So anything inside my component has a superclass or a parent class that is div. So I can pick a few implementations from div, and can I have it in my component, and then I add some extra code to it. Where can I find you an examples? I would Google it, actually. Like, let's see. I would actually go to our GitHub, probably. So I think I have the beverage. So this is one of the interesting examples. Can you see the code, actually? This is one of the interesting examples that shows you how work is done in Vaadin. And I have no idea where I'm going. I'm just like trying to see if there is a view that is extending another view. Let's see this one, for example. Yeah, so more or less something like that. So a pure Java code, that's a class that extends another class, and then you probably have a modified constructor if you want. And here, for example, like you're calling the functions that are building your new component or your new view. So each one of those is a method call that's described down. That is, for example, creating the search box, creating the list box, and so on. So making a little bit more complex layout. And then this whole new layout, you can deal with it as a new object or a new layout and so on. And then we call it a component. Make sense? Yeah. More questions?
Can you write in Java some functions that, I don't know, comes from 1 to 10,000 and then it will be translated into a JavaScript function?
Excellent question. So I'll answer you in two different things. So the first thing is, does it have to be a layout? The answer is no. It doesn't have to be a layout. It can be anything. So practically any component, if it's a grid, if it's a button, if it's a text field, if it's calendar, any component, even if he developed a component called XYZ, then you can extend it. So there is no limit.
Still layout, it's still about the items in let's say, DOM,
So it doesn't have to be a display, a UI element.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be. It can be a functionality. It can be a back-end. What can I think about?
I mean, can I write some logic in Java and then it would be translated into JavaScript? Or?
So yeah, that's the second part of the question. So we do not translate to JavaScript.
That's JS interop and GW2 compiler. So GW2 framework is dead and no longer cool, but the compiler is still alive.
Yeah, I cannot claim it's dead or not. I'm in front of the camera, so I didn't say anything. But we do not use GWT. We do not use JS interop for that. The thing is, we do not compile Java into JavaScript. That was the old style up till 2015, 16. That was the old style. We were actually taking your Java code and translating it in JavaScript. And based on many experience and tests and performance and so on, we decided that now it's time to stop doing that. Now's the time to actually change the whole model. We create a JavaScript template, and whatever Java code you write is mapping to that template. So still, more or less, you don't have to worry about the front end, but the code is not translated into JavaScript. Okay? If you write any kind of back-end functionalities, it's going to stay on the back end. If you write any kind of front-end functionality, it's going to extend the front-end template without any compilation in the between. And that's also one thing that it is effectively accelerating the development time a lot. So previously, you had to wait for the Java to be compiled into JavaScript, the GWT compilation, probably you are experienced with that. So that was a nightmare. And also the nightmare of understanding how to debug a GWT, because you develop something in Java and you debug it on the browser and how to do this and mapping and so on. Now it's a separate concern. We have a web component, that's a front end. It's a project. And we have the back end, that's Java, that you can test it with unit tests or any Java testing platforms that you love to use. Thank you. Thank you. That's also a good question. So the question here is, does that mean that the code is on the server side, not on the client side? Up till 2015-16, that was also the case. So we used to be called the server-side Java framework. That also, I have to say, lead a little bit of a confusion for new Vaadin people, because they ask us, like, so it's a server-side, but it's front-end, so it's like how it works. But if you're an architect, you probably understand this very well. What is a server-side technology for front-end development? It's something that works completely on the server side, and every single thing that happens on the front end has to go round trip to the server and back. You click on the button, it goes to the server and back. You make text validation, it has to go to the server and back. Practically speaking, there are two advantages for that. The biggest advantage is security. So nothing executes on the browser. That makes you guarantees that nobody can hack the text field, nobody can hack the validation, nobody can alter anything, nothing can happen in the front facing. Even the hacker cannot read the logic, what are you doing? That's a very good advantage. The second advantage is if we assume that you're working in, for example, a financial institution, a bank, something like that, and then your customers are people who really need to use it in a critical place with good network connection. You don't have those such users that might be using it while in the train where connection is hazy and so on. So you're perfectly targeting those kind of customers, and you guarantee that there is no problem of making a round trip every time of any single request. But again, we needed to make this to stop, and we needed to make it open so that you can have functionality on the client side and not needing to all the time make this round trip. So this round trip is still the default setting up till today. You click on the button, it goes, because it's an event-driven. So if I go here, no, actually, it's here. If we're talking about an event. So what will happen if I click on this button? This button is located on the browser. You click on it, it goes to the server, so the server knows that this button got clicked, so it assigns this event. And then this event gets executed on the server side, and then go back to the browser, and then performs the execution. So that's the default behavior. But what we did is that we also made it possible to delegate the execution and make it happen completely on the client side with an option to make it occur again on the server side. So in some cases, you want to make a validation quickly on password field, for example. You want to make sure that the password matches a specific format. So you want this logic to execute on the client side. But nevertheless, you want to also double check on the client, on the server side again. So that's what we have implemented now. And I have to say the limitation is you need to write this client-side logic yourself, and it has to be JavaScript. So what I hope for in future versions of Vaadin Framework is that those common validation and clicks and notification and so on gets executed on. Actually, notification is executed on the client side. You don't have to go for round trip. But what I'm talking about is, for example, these validations. We create boilerplate for those validations so that they happen on the client side, and you don't have to make this round trip all the time. Nevertheless, for example, payment request APIs, this is the example I'm making here. It's performing everything on the client side without going to the server side till there is an important information, like the credit card information, is going to the server side. So this is the only case where I go to the server side and return. Why? Because the client side web component has been developed that way. So the framework doesn't have to worry about that. Just uses the web component and then go back. This is mentioned. This is mentioned here. So this is a tutorial. So I took basically a web component that is developed by someone from the community. He's from Portugal, I guess. And then I included it inside my project as a dependency. And then here we go. And then I just added it. So whatever functionalities he has developed, whether it's client-side validation, clicking event, popping up, showing up a pop-up, collecting payments, all these kind of things, all that happened on the client side. The server side only get notified when the last action happens, which is basically the credit card information going back.
Is there some library of ready components? I understand that it's rather oriented on existing components than writing my own. There is rather no such necessity. Does it mean that there is some library and I have plenty of them, and that's why there is no need to write custom components?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. So the question here is, what is the directory from where you can get those components, right? So as I said, they are standard web components. It's a win-win situation where when we develop a component, we make it because it's standard, then anyone who is using any kind of front-end framework can use it. React, Angular, Vue, you name it, it will work with you, right? And the other way around. If you develop our standard web component, it works for Vaadin. That's why webcomponents.org, this is a community-driven initiative that's trying to list all possible components that are on the web. Let's see, how many are there? As you can see, the internet is very nice here. Or maybe it's too long. But yeah, so webcomponents.org, if I remember correctly, last time I checked, it had like around 2,000 components. But there is a trick. Webcomponents.org doesn't limit anyone from submitting any web component to be included. So there are actually, as a matter of reality, there are some components that are completely useless or not functional and so on. That's why we at Vaadin, we created this so-called Vaadin directory. So if you go to vaadin.com/directory, what we have done is we have taken all those components listed on webcomponents.org, and we tested them manually ourselves, and we give them a rating, and those that we know that they are actually working and actually functioning and make sense, we made them available here. So as you can see, we have 1,700. Actually, those are all the components. Let me. Okay, it doesn't show the number. Yeah, it's slightly less than that. It's probably 1,500. Yeah, it used to be showing the number here, but it's around 1,500 components that we have here. They are all the components that we know for sure that they are at least working, right? And as you can see, we give them like some kind of rating to see if it's like working or not. Of course, if it's by Vaadin, then we give it also support, right? So we have this. Not really. So combo box, yeah. Well, the community can give it rating as well. Like this one, for example, it has 1 comment or 2 discussion. So 3 weeks ago, someone is talking, and then you can come here and give it a rating somehow, like you can. Yeah, so just go to vaadin.com/directory. That's going to be a little bit faster way to get components. Let's see if this is, actually, is this broken or what? So 70 for A.
But it's good to know that we can use any, not only from the Vaadin side.
Yes, so actually, or technically speaking, we classify web components under 2 categories. Categories that are on Bower and categories that are on NPM. Have you heard about the difference between Bower and NPM? Yeah. Okay, so Bower components are components that are, well, I cannot complain about Bower. Bower is a very excellent tool, and it's still functional till today. But if you go to bower.com, you'll find a big banner that says, Bower is deprecated, please use something else. Use Yarn or NPM and so on. So it has been a good time, many years, where people were developing components and putting them on Bower. So we call them the legacy components. We support those up till Vaadin 14, but starting from Vaadin 15, so Vaadin 14 is the one that is going to be released next week. Starting from Vaadin 15, we are also going to drop any support for Bower components. They can be excellent components. They can be like very good, but Bower decided to be deprecated for some technical reasons, and then the new components that are NPM components can be installed. So if I want to give you a direct statement, what I can say here is any NPM module can be used inside Vaadin Framework starting from version 14. Boxing the statement.
One more question about Spring, Swing like API, and if I write such code, what about this, how is it called, hot reload? Am I able to reload to see the changes?
Yeah, that's Java. So if you use any JRable, for example, it will work. If you don't use JRable, if you have some setup for hot reload and auto refresh of the browser, that works as well. If you're using Spring, that will work perfectly for you. Yeah. So more topics. We discussed like 6 till now. So sometimes you want to have a responsive UI, and sometimes you want to for example, get some browser information, width of the browser, or like the orientation and so on. So starting from Vaadin 14 also, we made them available to be able to get them from the Java. So you don't have to like read the headers or anything. You can just get some browser information from the Java side. Now, this is the Spring part that I was talking about. So theoretically speaking, Vaadin works with any backend. we don't say that you have to be a Spring developer, or you don't have to be a CDI, or you don't have to use Oracle or non-Oracle or whatever. It's completely up to you to choose whatever backend you want, because at the end of the day, you need to bind whatever data that you are getting from the backend, you need to bind it to the front end, right? So we have the so-called binder that is allowing you to do this in a nicer Java fancy way. Of course, there is also the alternative way, which is basically setting up web services and sending and receiving the data through web services, if that's what you want. Data validation. So this is the data validation server side of data validation. So we have built-in validators, Java validators that you can use, or that's all if you want to do it on the server side. Even for theming, you can create a Java class for theming and define the theming properties that you are applying onto your component or view, and then apply it on top of your Java class. You can also set a class name. If you manually add a CSS class name inside your CSS file, then you can assign it to a button, for example, set class name. Nevertheless, there are some theme variants that are built in. We have the so-called Lumu theme variants, and you can use them to identify a specific variants. And yeah, I talked about this JavaScript part. So the JavaScript part, we cannot run away from JavaScript. It's up to you if you think that it's best for your business to use JavaScript, or you think that your business is better off with having 100% Java. So our framework is not probably for everyone on earth. It's not for JavaScript developers. It's mainly for Java developers that want to keep the whole ecosystem Java. And what we are working on for many years now is to still keep everything on Java. But we promise you that you will run into corner cases where you still need JavaScript for some reason or another, and then that's why we also still provide you with some JavaScript APIs to be able to handle those cases. This is the two examples that I have. And also, well, this document, I'm gonna publish it as a blog post and make it available right after today. Then you can also check those tutorials on how to do even more things, like how to develop, how to test on cloud, and how to evaluate like cloud solutions and so on.
I'm still not sure if I have this, let's say, front-end code, and I do some, let's say, simple calculation, but in Java. Am I able to do this calculation in Java and feed this web component to the results?
Yeah.
So can I write any Java code to this? I feel like I have to do JavaScript on the front-end side.
No, you want to make calculations and you want to display them on.
Yeah, and let's say there will be some difficult one, so JavaScript is not good enough to do this calculation, so I would like to use Java to do it right.
Mm-hmm.
And so am I able to use Java features?
So I mean, I'll try to take an example on top of my head. So let's take an example that's like calculator, okay? So the calculator is a text field, or let's assume it's two text fields that takes the first number and the second number, and the mathematical operation, which is plus, for example. So I take a text field that takes the first number, and the second text field that takes the second number, and then a button that takes the value of those two numbers and send them to the back end. And then you can do the calculation on the back end, and the result of this calculation, you decide how it's communicated back to the front end. Yeah, so I can assure you that this is the easiest part. The challenging part, which is not really visible, is how to read something that has been assigned to the front end. So let's assume that when I click on a button, this is a web component, for example, that is not developed by me, and when I click on this button, it goes directly to a specific function on the front end. So I want to also be able to listen to this function on the back end. And this is where we have this event handler. So event handler is mapping whatever functionalities that's happening on the client side to the back end as well, and then read it on the back end. Does that make sense?
Sounds okay. I would have to see the working example to get everything. Maybe I can check some examples from GitHub.
Yeah, I would invite anyone to give GitHub a try. So this is my favorite starting location. Starting from GitHub/Vaadin, github.com/Vaadin, and then you will see, well, actually the source code of the framework, but also you will see the other examples that we have there. Those can be like good guidance. So, more questions? No more questions? So I'm actually having like maybe 1 minute left. So yeah? Okay. So I can also show you that an alternative starting location, which is vaadin.com/start. So since we're talking about Java developers, we have also made the so-called starters for Java developers. Well, I mean, we are an open source company, yes, but we need to make some money at some point. That's why we have the commercial ones. You can skip them for now and then go for those. So if you want to create a component, you do not necessarily need to start from JavaScript. You can start also from here. So this is kind of like boilerplate that tells you how to create a component. You can continue all the way from here using Java only, but if you need like extra front-end functionalities, you might end up writing JavaScript code. Nevertheless, this is actually my favorite starting point, project base. It generates for you like the most simplest code ever that you might need, and it tells you what is the tech stack you have. Are you like running on Spring, or do you just want to have Java and then you will use a different backend? Is it CDI? Is it OSGI? And then it's gonna generate, like, you can say, for example, Devoxx, and then it's gonna give you the boilerplate that can be plugged into your stack directly. And the code, more or less, gonna be similar to this. So let me delete this. So this is the starting code. What this code is doing is basically defining a button. This button has a caption that says, click me, and an event. This event calls notification.show clicked. And more or less, this is the code that is running here. So a button, click me, and then it shows a notification clicked. Quickly, 2 more things. I have also, on my own GitHub, if you go to github/A.Mahdy, you'll find me, of course, but you'll find also this Vaadin Lite project, which is basically a way to generate a fat jar. You know fat jar? Where a jetty is embedded inside the application, so you don't need to use external server, Tomcat, or whatever. You can, this is, in some use cases, very interesting to have the jetty itself bundled inside your final jar. And this is actually the one that I'm using here. So the one that's running here right now is a fat jar application. The command that I used is this. You cannot hear it. So this is the command that I used, java -jar. I didn't use any server or anything like that. Final thing that I want to show you is now I killed the server, right? Oh, fuck, sorry. Now I killed the server, right? What do you think will happen if I reload this page? Make a guess.
Maybe this PW application which is currently cached or something?
Yes. So it will tell you that you are offline. This is the welcome screen. Exactly. It tells you that this is the welcome screen. Sorry, you are offline. The application right now is not working or something like that. So it doesn't show these dinosaurs that start to jump or anything like that. It just tells me that you are offline. And this page, you can customize it. You can either have a customized page like this that says the application offline, or you can actually go one step further and cache the application and make the application or limited functionalities of the application to be working offline. I guess I have made a tutorial about that in Vaadin tutorial. So this is my playground. If you go to vaadin.com/tutorials, you'll find everything, most of the things that I write. So this is how to make Vaadin application installable. And yeah, so this is a prompt. When you open the application, it tells you, like, do you want to install this application? And if you do install it, then it will become part of the application stack on your device, whether it's a mobile device or a desktop device. And this is how it goes when it's offline. And then this is a small example on how to customize the offline experience and add a JavaScript code and cache extra stuff on the front end. And this is an example when it's offline, but it's showing me something different. All right, so I think I passed the 1 minute already, but I hope that was informative enough. This is my Twitter. So my Twitter is A.Mahdy7. This is my Twitter. Of course, I don't have like slides or anything, but this is my Twitter. I'm gonna post about this document that has all the links and everything that we discussed today. Please hit me if you still have more questions. You might find me around today and tomorrow as well if you still have more questions. Otherwise, thank you so much for staying that much and enjoy the party. Thank you.